Dear viewers, the story you are about to hear unfolded in Dallas, Texas, in the year 1998. It began with a nurse who believed her duty was simple: to heal the sick, to comfort the weak, and to follow the rules written in hospital policy. Yet one patient carried with him a request that no prescription could fill and no procedure could resolve. In the quiet hours of night, as machines hummed and the halls lay still, their lives intertwined in a way that defied every expectation. What started as duty soon became something unspoken, something fragile, something that could not be named. Behind the walls of that hospital, choices were made that would alter the course of two souls, and the truth hidden in their story waited like a shadow at the edge of light. This is not only a story of medicine or fate, but the human heart caught between desire and duty, between what was allowed and what could never be allowed. Dallas General Hospital in 1998 woke each morning with the same storm of motion and sound. Stretchers rolled down crowded hallways, wheels squeaking faintly against the polished tile. Pagers buzzed from the belts of nurses and doctors, their sharp tones cutting to the layered hum of voices and machinery. The smell of disinfectant was constant, sharp and unmistakable, mixing with the faint traces of stale coffee and the sterile scent of fresh linens. Every corner of the building seemed to vibrate with urgency, a rhythm that never slowed, no matter the hour. Emily Carter moved through it with practiced steadiness, her tray of medications balanced carefully in her hands. She was 22, still young, yet her posture reflected a determination that made her seem older. Her blonde hair was tied neatly at the back of her head, and her name tag swung gently as she walked. She had been working at the hospital for just over 14 months, still a newcomer by the standards of many around her, but her colleagues had already learned to recognize her calm touch. Patients trusted her, and families noticed the quiet reassurance in her voice. For Emily, nursing had never been about a paycheck. It was a calling, one that demanded not just skill, but heart. She moved from room to room, her pace brisk but unhurried, offering medication, adjusting blankets, and exchanging brief words with patients who were beginning another day of uncertainty. Each task mattered, each gesture carried weight, and she treated them all with the same quiet devotion. Her mind was focused on the list before her, the order of rooms and responsibilities that structured her shift. When she reached room 412, she pushed the door open with her shoulder, her tray balanced firmly against the palms. The space inside was calmer than the corridor outside. The lights were softer, and the faint hum of machines filled the silence in steady rhythm. The man in the bed sat partially upright, his body propped by pillows, his expression one of stillness rather than strain. Marcus Johnson was 30 years old, his tall frame weakened by the recent near-fatal heart attack that had brought him there. His skin carried the pallor of illness, but his eyes were striking, deep brown and unwavering. When he looked at Emily, it was not with fear, impatience, or the weariness she often saw in patients. His gaze held calm, steady presence, as though he was meeting her rather than simply receiving care. Emily stepped forward, setting the tray down with practiced precision, but something about the moment felt different. The room seemed quieter, the air heavier, though nothing had changed except the way his eyes held hers. She felt a flicker of something she could not name, something that lingered in her chest even as she turned back to her work. In the blur of another busy morning, it was a single moment, but one that left its mark. The weeks at Dallas General blended into each other with the steady rhythm of hospital life. Yet for Emily, there was one patient whose presence refused to fade into routine. Marcus Johnson, with his calm manner and quiet humor, became the face that lingered in her thoughts long after she had left the ward. While most patients expressed frustration or despair, he carried himself with a resilience that unsettled her. He found ways to notice the smallest details around him, such as the old ceiling fan above his bed that groaned with each turn of its blades. He spoke of it as if it were a companion, and his jokes about its persistence made her laugh in moments when she least expected it. Their conversations never strayed far from the ordinary. He asked her about her favorite books, the music she listened to, the kind of weather she liked best. Simple questions, yet they created a rhythm that filled the silences between them with a comfort she could not ignore. Emily responded cautiously, aware of the rules she had learned to live by. No attachments, no unnecessary closeness, no room for personal feelings within the walls of the hospital. She repeated those rules to herself like a shield, but they weakened each time she recalled the sound of his laughter. It echoed in her memory after her shifts ended, following her into the quiet of her apartment and settling in the spaces where she had once been alone with her thoughts. One afternoon, when the ward was short-staffed, the strain of her duties showed clearly on her face. She moved quickly from room to room, balancing trays and charts with the relentless pace of an overworked schedule. By the time she reached Marcus's room, she was late with his medication. She expected impatience or a reminder of her delay, but instead she found his gaze fixed gently on her expression. His eyes read the fatigue she had tried to hide, the weariness in her steps, the way her shoulders carried the weight of the day. Rather than complain, he offered her something unexpected. His voice, calm and steady, carried not reproach but concern. He suggested she should sit for a moment, just to rest, even briefly. At first she refused, her sense of duty pushing her forward, her mind reminding her the line she could not cross. Yet the chair beside his bed seemed to pull her closer, its presence louder than her own resistance. Against her better judgment, she lowered herself into it, feeling the quiet of the room press around them. The choice lasted only a moment, but it carried a weight far beyond its simplicity. She realized as she rose again that she had already given away something more than time. That small act, born of exhaustion and his gentle insistence, became the first step across a boundary she had promised herself she would never cross. It was not duty, not medicine, but something far more fragile and dangerous, and it lingered with her long after she left his room. The note had been small, folded into a neat square, but it carried a weight Emily could not ignore. When Marcus had pressed it into her hand earlier that evening, she had felt its edges burn against her skin long after she slipped it into her pocket. She told herself she would not read it, that she would throw it away with the scraps of paper and empty wrapper she discarded at the end of her shift. But curiosity, and something deeper she did not want to name, made her unfold it in the solitude of supply room. The words were simple, written in careful script, but they left her breathless. Please come at midnight. It's urgent. Come alone. For hours afterward, she argued silently with herself. She knew the risk, knew the line she would cross if she followed the instructions written on that fragile piece of paper. It was unprofessional, dangerous even, to meet a patient in secret. The rules of her job, the rules she had built her life around, told her to ignore the request. Yet as the night deepened and the hospital settled into its hushed rhythm, she felt herself drawn toward the decision she had sworn she would not make. At 11:57, unable to resist any longer, she walked the dimly lit corridor with her heart pounding against her ribs. The silence pressed heavily around her, broken only by the faint hum of distant machines and the occasional flicker of light through half-closed blinds. Every step felt louder than it should have, echoing through the emptiness of the hallway, until she reached the door of room 412. Inside, Marcus was waiting. He sat upright against a stack of pillows, the lamp beside him casting warm shadows across his face. His eyes were fixed on the doorway, heavy with something unspoken, as though he had been carrying words too fragile to release until now. The stillness of the room seemed to gather around them, wrapping Emily in a tension she could not shake. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady, each syllable deliberate, as if chosen with care. He told her that he did not have much time left, that although the doctors avoided the truth, he could feel it in the failing rhythm of his own body. He spoke of the silence that had followed him since tragedy had taken his family, leaving him the last to carry their name. There was no fear in his words, only a deep weariness and a heavier grief, the kind that came from knowing an entire story might vanish when he did. Then came confession that stilled the air around them. He said he did not want a story to end with him. He wanted a child, someone to carry his name, someone to hold a fragment of the life he could not finish. And when he imagined who could be the mother, only one face came to him, Emily's. The word struck her with a force she had not expected. She froze where she stood, unable to draw in a full breath, her thoughts tangled between disbelief and sorrow. She told herself it was impossible, that he did not know her beyond the walls of the hospital, that he could not understand the life she still dreamed of. Yet he whispered that he knew enough, that he had seen in her what no one else had given him in months: compassion without pity, care without obligation, presence without condition. The silence that followed pressed heavily on Emily's chest, her heart torn between the boundaries she had built and the raw truth of his plea. In that quiet room, under the muted glow of the lamp, she realized she was standing at the edge of something that could not be undone. The days that followed passed with a heaviness Emily could not escape. She moved through her duties with precision, maintaining the calm professionalism her colleagues had come to expect from her, but beneath that steady exterior her mind was restless. She avoided Marcus except when required, limiting her visits to brief exchanges, her eyes carefully trained on charts and medication trays rather than on him. Yet the silence between them was louder than words. His request replayed in her head like a voice she could not silence. A child, a legacy, a part of him to live on. At 22, Emily felt the fragility of her own beginnings. She dreamed of graduate school, of pushing her studies further, of traveling to cities she had only seen in books or on postcards. She imagined finding love in her own time, building a life shaped by choices she made freely, not ones pressed upon her by circumstance. The weight of Marcus's plea threatened to eclipse all of that, pulling her into a world she had never imagined for herself. It was not simply a question of what he wanted. It was a question of who she was, and whether she was ready to carry the burden of another's unfinished story. At night, alone in her apartment, she tried to push the thought away. She cooked small meals she barely tasted, flipped through textbooks she could not focus on, and stared at the ceiling long after the city outside had gone quiet. No matter what she did, she could not stop picturing the look in his eyes, the steadiness in his voice, the truth that came not from desperation, but from conviction. His words lingered like a shadow over every moment, reminding her that it asked not out of selfishness, but out of fear of being erased. One evening, unable to contain the conflict inside her, Emily found herself standing outside his room long after she had finished her rounds. She had not planned to go in, but her hand pressed against the door and pushed it open before she had time to reconsider. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Marcus looked up as though he had been expecting her all along. His expression carried no surprise, only patience, the quiet endurance of someone who knew time was not on his side. Emily moved closer and sat down, her body tense, her breath uneven. The words came before she could hold them back. She admitted she could not give him what he had asked for, not the impossible request of carrying his legacy through a child. But she confessed that she had not been able to stop thinking about it, that the thought had followed her into every corner of her life, leaving her unsettled and uncertain. The silence that followed was heavy, but Marcus reached across the space between them, his hand brushing lightly against hers. The gesture was warm, steady, unforced, and filled with quiet understanding. He did not repeat his request. Instead, he asked for something smaller, something that carried its own immeasurable weight. He asked her not to let him be forgotten. The words settled in her chest like a vow, and though she gave no answer, she knew she had already accepted the promise. The following week brought a steady decline that no chart or statistic could soften. Marcus's strength seemed to slip further away with each passing day. His skin grew pale, the healthy tone replaced by a grayness that deepened under the fluorescent lights. His breaths came shorter, rougher, each one drawn with visible effort. Emily noticed it during her rounds, even in the smallest movements. The way he shifted with difficulty, the way his hand trembled when he reached for water, the way his eyes closed a moment too long after speaking. His illness was carving its mark into him, and the inevitability of what lay ahead pressed heavier on her with each visit. The war itself carried its own rhythm, but for Emily, the minutes she spent in Marcus's room stretched differently, each one weighted with unspoken truths. One night, as the hallway grew quiet and the ward dimmed into the subdued atmosphere of late hours, Marcus's voice rose softly, thinner than before but steady with conviction. He told her there was something else he wanted, something beyond the request that had already unsettled her heart. His words carried the force of a final wish, spoken with a clarity that left no room for doubt. He wanted to be tested as a donor. There was a boy down the hall, only 16, his kidneys failing, his future hanging in uncertainty. If Marcus's own heart failed him, he wanted to get what he could, to ensure his death carried meaning by offering another the chance to live. The request struck Emily with sudden force. She felt her throat tighten, her body still, as she tried to comprehend the weight of what he was asking. It was not something easily done. There were procedures, protocols, endless paperwork, and delays that hospitals demanded before decisions of such magnitude could be made. She tried to explain, her voice breaking under the weight of her own conflict, that it was complicated, that approvals and forms could bury his intention before it ever reached the boy who needed him. But Marcus's gaze held hers with unwavering steadiness. His eyes, though tired, did not falter. He begged her without raising his voice, insisting that she not let bureaucracy rob him of the only chance he had left to matter. He asked her not to let his death dissolve into silence, not to let his body pass without leaving behind a trace of good. His words, though quiet, pressed against her with more force than any demand, filling the space between them with an urgency she could not ignore. Before she could form a response, before she could promise or refuse, his body betrayed him. His chest tightened suddenly, his hand clutching at the thin hospital gown, his breath breaking into sharp gasps. The monitors beside him erupted in alarm, the one steady rhythm turning erratic and chaotic. Emily's heart leapt as her training took over, her hands slamming against the call button. The door burst open, nurses rushing in with practice speed, followed by a doctor whose voice cut through the noise with sharp commands. The crashed cart wheeled into the room, its metal frame rattling as it hit the tile. Emily stepped back, her own pulse racing as she watched them work, her chest heavy with dread. Amid the storm of movement and the frantic cries of medical staff, Marcus's lips moved faintly. His voice could not rise above the chaos, but Emily saw the words form, clear enough to strike her even without sound. Don't forget. The phrase carved itself into her, more binding than any spoken promise. As the team fought to bring him back, Emily stood frozen, the weight of his request pressing harder than ever, knowing that even in the edge of collapse, his final thought was not for himself, but for what might remain when he was gone. Emily stood motionless as the room erupted into controlled chaos. The defibrillator paddles pressed against Marcus's chest, and his body lifted violently with the first shock. A second jolt followed, the force rippling through him, his frame jerking against the bed. For a moment the monitor flatlined in an unbearable stretch of silence, and then a fragile rhythm returned, faint and unsteady, but enough to ignite a surge of determination among the medical team. The doctor called for transfer, and within seconds the bed was unlocked and pushed into the hallway. Tubes rattled, machines rolled beside him, and the wheels of the gurney squeaked against the tile as the team moved quickly toward the intensive care unit. Emily followed behind them, her steps uneven, her hands trembling so hard she pressed them together to keep them steady. Her breath came shallow, her vision blurred slightly from the weight of adrenaline rushing through her. When they disappeared through the doors of the ICU, she was left standing alone in the corridor. The world around her seemed strangely hushed, the only sound the distant hum of ventilation and the faint buzz of overhead lights. Her gaze drifted almost unconsciously toward room 418. Through the narrow opening of the blinds, she saw the boy Marcus had spoken of. He was asleep, his face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent glow, an oxygen tube resting lightly beneath his nose. His chest rose and fell weakly, his body fragile against the sterile white sheets. Emily's heart tightened as she realized Marcus had carried the boy in his thoughts even as his own body failed. The stillness shattered suddenly. The hospital intercom crackled with sharp urgency, its voice cutting through quiet with words that froze her blood. Code Blue, ICU, Code Blue. The announcement echoed off the walls, reverberating in her chest like a blow. For an instant she stood frozen, the syllables repeating in her mind until her body jolted into motion. She ran down the hallway, her shoes striking against the tile in quick, uneven beats. Her pulse thudded in her ears, her throat dry as she forced herself to move faster. The closer she came to the ICU, the louder the noise became. Rushed commands, hurried footsteps, the sound of machinery colliding in urgency. She pushed through the double doors, her chest tight with fear of what awaited her inside. The sight that met her eyes stopped her breath. In that room, under the harsh glare of ICU lights, surrounded by doctors and nurses whose faces were drawn with tension, something had unfolded that left the entire hospital stunned.